Hello, lovelies, and welcome to a new episode of Real Nightmares, where we deduct fact from fiction in your favorite horror media. And happy Halloween! 'Tis the season of Halloween. We're going to be covering 1979's The Amityville Horror. And yes, I did read the book for the purpose of this video, checked it out from my local library, as we cannot exclude any source material when discussing these kinds of topics. So hang on to your religious texts and clutch your crosses as we go head to head with demonic forces. And if you haven't seen the movie, you can watch it on Max right now. My first experience with the Amityville Horror was actually with the 2005 remake in 2006-2007. I was having a sleepover at a friend's house and we rented some movies from our local Hollywood video. And what makes this sleepover particularly memorable wasn't the movie, but it was her house. It was this giant house in the middle of the woods with no neighbors, and the back wall of the living room was just a giant window that faced the deep dark woods. So it was a little scary at night in particular. I did not particularly sleep well at that sleepover, as I was too busy having nightmares about weirdly horny babysitters hitting on children, because that was the true horror of that remake.
So do you French?
Do I what?
Kissing, tongues.
No.
But we're not even going to consider the remake relevant. They changed so much, it was kind of like, what's the point of this? Plus, Ryan Reynolds' inability to play any character that isn't just himself is kind of distracting. Also, look at these people. You expect me to believe they're living in 1975? These are the faces of people who know exactly what a smartphone is. So for the sake of organization, we're gonna first summarize the movie, then talk about the differences in the book, then go into the true story it's based off of, and then talk about the conspiracy about the entire franchise. So join me as we deduct fact from fiction and the Amityville Horror. Our story begins with a gruesome massacre as Ronald DeFeo kills his entire family in their sleep with a rifle on a dark and stormy night. Cut to a year later to Kathy and George Lutz touring the home. They immediately fall in love with it and decide its gruesome history has nothing to do with them. It's too good of a deal and they simply can't pass up the opportunity. And they make the questionable decision to keep the previous family's furniture? Like, why? Why would you do that? Why would you want to keep the bed frames and furniture of people who were massacred in their own beds, in their own home? Weird choices. Spiritual or not, that's weird. Upon moving in, the couple goes outside to play with the kids while Father Mancuso lets himself in. They had asked him to come over and bless their new house. Mancuso wonders where they are, hears children giggling upstairs, and goes to investigate. He enters the spare bedroom to find no one and sees the family all outside enjoying themselves. He decides to go ahead with the blessing anyways. Immediately, flies appear and the door closes. He starts to break out in a sweat. Two flies quickly becomes a swarm as Father Mancuso comes down with a coughing fit. Completely overwhelmed with a feeling of sickness, he physically can't compose himself. The house screams at him to leave. So like a good boy, he does. He tries to call them later to warn them about what happened, but the receiver plays nothing but static. He washes his face and discovers blisters forming on the palm of his hands. Is this some form of stigmata or just a coincidence? He comes down with the flu regardless. George Lutz starts not feeling well either, freezing. He can't seem to get warm no matter what the thermostat says. Kathy decides to warm up George with a kinda long and unnecessary sex scene. It's only 1 minute and 30 seconds, but it feels like 10 minutes to me. Something about it is so awkward and painful to watch. Luckily for me, it's interrupted by Amy.
I wanna go home.
The feeling is mutual. Well, there's your problem. Your daughter is cuddling Annabelle at night. It seems Amy has a friend staying the night. When 3:15 strikes, George wakes up and hears voices coming from Amy's room. Her window is open and we see the doll moved to the chair. Like, hello? George becomes obsessed with chopping wood and fueling the fire as he just can't seem to get warm at all. And I can tell you from experience, being cold all the time does make you bitchy and irritable. He is valid for that. But the movie wants to imply his mood is due to being partially possessed. Kathy smells something funky in the kitchen and Amy shows up with imaginary friend Jody.
And does your friend Jody like sugar cookies too?
I don't think so.
No?
Well, I guess more for me. The toilets get nasty just in time for Aunt Helena's arrival. Kathy's aunt, who also happens to be a sister, too. Complicated family tree. And just like Father Mancuso, she comes down with the sickness. The house continues to bring a certain spooky and unsettling vibe to the function.
She was shot in the head!
Right at 3:15 a.m. We assume she's referring to the DeFeo mother who died in this very room at 3:15 a.m. On this very bed frame, I want to add, because they kept the deceased's beds, which is just fucking weird. Father Mancuso attempts to go back to the house, but they have some car troubles. It's time for Kathy's brother's wedding, and the $1,500 of cash he brought into the home for the caterer goes missing. They search the rest of the movie, but it's never found. They leave Amy home with a babysitter while everyone else attends Jimmy's wedding, and a mishap occurs with the babysitter.
Amy! Amy, open the door! Amy!
And Amy just sits there like a little psychopath. The family comes home and we learn there's no lock on the closet door.
Why didn't you open the door? Why didn't you answer me?
Jackie, why didn't you unlock the door? You heard Jackie knocking?
Jody wouldn't let me.
There is nothing that angers me more than unsympathetic children. For whatever reason, unsympathetic children just bring up this rage in me where I'm like, why can't you just be normal?
Just be normal!
Like, get this girl evaluated and out of my sight. Father Mancuso begs for help and he's met with this smug asshole. I'd recognize that smug attitude anywhere. That's Murray Hamilton, who also plays the greedy mayor in Jaws.
There's nothing to cover up. I think it's bureaucratical bullshit!
Preach, sister. No one hates bureaucracy more than me. Boy, let me tell ya. George's coworker and girlfriend, Jeff and Carolyn, stop by for a visit, and Carolyn wants nothing to do with what this house is selling. George acts real weird with Jeff, but he snaps out of it when he hears screams as Greg's hand gets mysteriously slammed in the window. Miraculously, no bones were broken, and it's that time again.
Oh boy, 3 a.m.
All I gotta say is thank God boxer briefs are the standard for men now. While he investigates the fly situation, the front door and basement door busts open. The police explain that it looks like someone was breaking out of the house and not breaking into the house. That's worse to me. That's just so much worse to me, like actually. Amy talks to Kathy about Jody, and we learn Jody might not be so harmless after all.
She says she wants me to live here forever and ever, so we can all play together.
George decides to do his own research on the house and learns his house was built by a witch who was run out of Salem. He goes to their local bar and gets told he looks just like Ronald DeFeo. You know, the guy who murdered his family in George's new lovely home? Kathy puts Amy to bed and spots beady red eyes looking at her through the window. Carolyn is overcome with curiosity. Poor Harry's paws are bloody from scratching the wall. And Carolyn becomes possessed, desperately trying to knock the wall down.
He's right, there is something here.
What's going on? You all gone mad? George!
A creepy, hidden, red-painted room is discovered, and George sees a visage of Ronald DeFeo, who looks identical to himself. They find their silver cross turned upside down, covered in black soot. The couple attempts to bless the home themselves because something's gotta be done. Big blisters appear all over Kathy's body in response to trying to cleanse the home, and just as quickly as they came, they disappeared. Father Mancuso attempts to bless the Lutz's home from the safety of the church, and this backfires as he now becomes blind.
I can't see.
Should have just left it alone, you know? It's 3:15 again, and George hears what I can only interpret as the marching drums of death coming from the ground floor, only for it to stop the moment he investigates. He trips over their lion statue as he realizes every piece of furniture has been moved. Kathy now gets up and finds George has killed their children. Gotcha! It was a dream. Kathy spots a bite mark on George's ankle, implying to the audience that he was bit by the lion statue the night before. We have a moment of domestic violence before Kathy flees, trying to track down Father Mancuso to no avail. The detective that came to the broken door scene has been stalking the family to try to figure out what's really going on. He learns they have an odd connection to Father Mancuso. This subplot is completely unnecessary and comes to 0 conclusions. It's just in there. Kathy does her own research and sees how Ronald DeFeo looks identical to George, piecing together that whatever possessed Ronald is currently possessing her husband. She rushes home to make sure the kids are safe and realizes she's going to have to save her family from her husband. George sees a giant pig in the window. Fully possessed now, he starts to hunt down the little girl. The house begins to bleed. Kathy, one step ahead, hid the kids away from George and he tries to kill her. All of a sudden, he snaps out of it. The house continues to bleed as the well in the red room bursts open, releasing what we can assume is a legion of demons, or malefic spirits or something. Windows burst and the family finally flees. Like the monsters that they are, they left the dog Harry behind. If this was my family, my dog would have been in my arms the entire time. The father runs back for Harry and falls into the now open well, which is full of blood. Not water, blood. He and Harry prevail, and luckily everyone gets out alive, including Harry, the most important character in the film. So how does the movie compare to the book, The Amityville Horror by J. Anson, published in 1977? It kind of doesn't. The narrative where the father is possessed and trying to kill his family doesn't happen in the books and was written for the movie. He never tried to kill his family, so that kind of gets rid of the main plot, or at least climax. He and his wife, however, did beat their kids, and they tried to blame that on being possessed. But honestly, possession or not, I cannot imagine publicly publishing that I abused my children in a book. That is crazy to me. And let me tell ya, Kathy Lutz ain't nothing like Margot Kidder. The real Kathy Lutz is having coffee and cigarettes for breakfast every morning. And at one point, she threatens to break the kids' bones because she thought that they spread Jell-O on the walls. Even if they did, is a horrible thing to say to your children. Like, I'm pretty sure that actually qualifies as abuse. Even if they're like empty threats, like it's still psychologically damaging to children to threaten to like harm them if they don't clean up after themselves. Well, maybe she's more like Margot Kidder in Black Christmas.
Oh, why don't you go find a wall socket and stick your tongue in it? That'll give you a charge.
The parents continuously blame all of their anger, abuse, and aggression on being possessed. And every single member of the family at one point is possessed in the book, but only for a short amount of time. One thing the movie did get correct is that George was obsessed with the fireplace. He couldn't get warm in the house, even with the thermostat at 80, and prioritized nothing except staying warm by the fire. And also, just like the movie, he did let his business suffer due to his obsession with staying warm in the house. Okay, so here's a list of events that did not happen in the book and were completely made up for the movie. It being a dark and stormy night when DeFeo killed his family. The weather was actually clear that night in real life. The kids in the movie are named Matt, Greg, and Amy, but in the book, they're actually named Danny, Chris, and Missy. The babysitter getting locked in the closet. While a fun, scary scene for the film, it didn't happen in the book. There's no babysitter in the book that I remember. Harry the dog digging in the basement. Book Harry actually avoids the basement like his life depended on it. He just slept for the most part in his doghouse. Father Mancuso going blind did not happen. The father trying to kill his own family did not happen. Father Mancuso begging the other members of his church to help the Lutzes. The house oozing blood. And they did not call the police when they found their front door broken. They just called a repairman to fix it. And finally, Kathy having nightmares that George killed the children. It was not written that Kathy was having nightmares like that. So here's a list of details that are in the book but were left out of the movie. The Amityville Horror actually takes place in winter time, specifically between December 18th and January 13th. With snow and below freezing temperatures outside. But I guess Margot Kidder has already been part of one Christmas horror movie. They simply couldn't do it again. No, been there, done that. God forbid she's typecasted to a specific niche like Rachel McAdams, who at this point I'm actually convinced has dated a time traveler with all of her experience portraying it. And she still hasn't time traveled herself. She just dates men who do. Kathy and George on occasion beat their children and blame possession. The two sons would occasionally become possessed and physically fight each other, and sometimes Missy would just watch. Windows would constantly fly open and make the kids' rooms below freezing as it was winter. George would wake up in the middle of the night and find himself feeling the strong need to go outside and look inside the boathouse. The reason for this is never revealed. They never uncover any secrets of the boathouse, and I know that that's not in the movie or in the book, but in the book they bring up the boathouse like a lot. George also on occasion experiences sleep paralysis, and when he does, he hears a whole ass marching band downstairs. And I know the movie did it with like drums, but it was a whole ass marching band in the book, which to me is like more silly than it is scary. It's kind of comical when you think about it. When I was reading the book, the song I would hear was this.
It's a giraffe!
Green jello-like ooze would be found on the upstairs walls and at one point seeping out of the door to the upstairs playroom. My guess is the movie wanted to keep this detail but thought blood would be scarier. The parents found hoof prints in the snow on New Year's Eve. Their garage door was destroyed and taken off the hinges, but everything in the garage was untouched. Kathy would often smell perfume and feel the presence of a woman holding her waist. The lion statue in the book is a much bigger role. They find it randomly moved around a lot and it just kind of creeps them out. The parents saw demonic faces in the fireplace, and the fireplace also played a larger role in the book. Rooms in the house would occasionally smell like feces, and Father Mancuso's room also smelled like feces. Ewy. Kathy had consensual sex with a ghost. Yeah, we're gonna pause and let that one sink in. Father Mancuso did not fight to try to help the family, even remotely. He actually spent most of his time trying to avoid them, and then his guilt, every so often he'd be like, well, I should at least call them and tell them to move. And every time he tried to call, just like in the movie, like it would be static, but he did not nearly put in as much effort to help them as he did in the movie. His subplot in the book and in the movie, in my opinion, was like completely unnecessary, but whatever. Religious undertone makes things scarier ever since The Exorcist, so. Oh, he also doesn't tell the other priests about the Lutz's family for fear of looking insane. Their dog Harry refused to go into the basement, but he also refused to go into Missy's room, and he spent majority of the book asleep to the point to where they actually took him to the vet to make sure that he was okay because he was sleeping excessively. And the vet was just like, I don't know, he's eepy. He's just a sleepy guy. Let him rest. The Lutz's final night in the home, the boys actually ran downstairs screaming that there was a person in their room, and when the whole family, ran out onto the second floor hallway, they looked up the stairs and they saw a cloaked, faceless figure at the top of the stairs, and the entire family lost their shit and just left. They were in pretty deep financial troubles by the time they left this house. Now that's a lot of details, and I don't expect anyone to memorize that at all, but it's enough details for the book to feel very different from the movie. It is a pretty short read. It's only about 300 pages. I'm a slow reader, so I finished it in about 3 days. I'm not exactly an accelerated reader, and that's okay. That's okay, I'm a slow reader. We can't all be fast readers, okay? Some of us graduated high school with no AP courses, and that's okay too. I'm gonna be so real with you guys about this book. I don't think it's a good book. I don't even think it's that scary. It's not told in a sophisticated way at all. And then the window flew open, and then there was a guy, and then I was scared and I ran. It wasn't like the window suddenly flew open, chills were sent down their spine. Like it wasn't written eloquently to any extent. I'm sure it was scary at the time it was released because I don't think anything like it really existed yet, so I understand that. It heavily depends on the reader on whether or not you find it scary, but if you are someone who's been exposed to a lot of horror like I have, I just don't think it would be that scary. Okay. So what is the true story that this book is based off of? Let's start with the DeFeo massacre, because that's really when this whole story begins. And it's the one part of the story we have the most concrete details about. Ronald Joseph Butch DeFeo Jr., born September 26, 1951 in Brooklyn, New York, to parents Ronald and Louise DeFeo. He was the eldest of 5 kids, his younger siblings being Dawn, 18, Allison, 13, Mark, 12, and John, 9. On November 13th, 1974, at 3 a.m., he took a rifle and killed his entire family while they slept. Later that same day at 6:30 p.m., he went to his local bar frantically claiming someone broke in and killed his family. When the police arrived, he told them he got home at 6 p.m. to find the front door locked. He crawled in through a window and discovered his parents' bodies. Did he not have a key to the house he lives in? Every single member of the family was found lying face down in their bed, gunshot wounds in their back. 2 days later, on November 15th, 1974, new headlines emerged. DeFeo's son is accused. $200,000 in insurance was apparent motive for murders. He spent the rest of the day shooting heroin with his girlfriend before coming home and pretending to discover the bodies. Neighbors report to have heard the DeFeo's dog, a sheepdog named Shaggy, barking and howling at roughly 3:15 a.m. the morning of the murders. But what's strange is no one reports having heard the gunshots, and the gun did not have a silencer on it to anyone's knowledge. Many neighbors described Ronald as a troublemaker who did not get along with his family, and it was known that he was a heroin addict. Before the murders, he had been kicked out of school, arrested on grand larceny, and never finished his high school diploma. Wild and undisciplined were two words used to describe him. And others described him as 5'7", 155 pounds, good-looking, and constantly had girlfriends. People also described him as clean, neat, and well-dressed. The way he presented himself, I guess, just really wasn't how he actually was on the inside. To add on suspicion, Ronald was literally on probation for said grand larceny the night of the murders for having stolen a motor off a boat. And it also turns out that there was $17,900 worth of cash as well as checks for his grandfather's business missing. This man's defense for where that money was that he was on his way to deposit it to the bank. Some mysterious person with a gun at a stoplight robbed him. Come on. Now, the DeFeos was a very well-off family who did not struggle financially, so rumors speculated that they actually had ties to the mob. Some people speculated maybe Ronald was stealing money from his family to pay off an underground mafia debt. Ronald would also brag to fellow Long Islanders that his father is big in the mafia, and he would use this to threaten people and get away with shit. He was just known to threaten and manipulate people. But others state that they feel like it was clearly just to fuel his drug addiction. And then there's a few others who believed darker forces were at play here. It took merely 24 hours of interrogation for Ronald DeFeo to confess to slaying his family. Like the actual psychopath that he is, he also acted out to the police how he did it. Like, he got up and did a reenactment. I guess bragging or something, I don't know, but that's just fucking weird. The murder weapon was then recovered by scuba divers off the Amityville Village dock at Ocean Avenue. It's at this point the DeFeo family lawyer, Leonard Simmons, who had represented Ronald in the past, requested a psychiatric examination. 5 days after the attack, news sources started reporting how the bodies were all found face down with their arms stretched above their heads. Whispers began about how ritualistic this sounds, and with satanic panic on the rise, many wonder if this detail is related to witchcraft and Satanism. Ronald receives an indictment charging him with 6 counts of murder in the second degree. His lawyer at this point, Leonard Simmons, drops the case. He's like, I don't want to touch this. And his bid to have DeFeo examined by psychiatrists was denied. After roughly 3 lawyers were approached and refused to touch the case, a public defender was then assigned to the case, William Weber. The trial wasn't until November 1975. Weber's official defense for DeFeo is that robbery was not the motive for his client's actions, because even though DeFeo admitted to killing his family and reenacted it, he didn't take any money or jewelry from the family safe in the parents' bedroom. And that is why the reason for his crime must be insanity. Not a strong defense, but I guess the guy had to come up with something. Unfortunately for William Weber, Harold Zolan testified that Ronald told him that he stole large sums of money from his parents' bedroom that night. and his cellmate, John Kramer, which holy shit, I could not believe his cellmate was named John Kramer. But John Kramer testified that DeFeo had told him that he would feign insanity and fool the jury, and when he was released from a mental institution, DeFeo would collect insurance money from his relative's death and recover money and jewelry he allegedly took from a box in his parents' room and later buried. Which is such a John Kramer thing to do, doing the right thing even if you don't get a reward for it, like, so in character. Weber, however, disputed these claims by showing the DeFeo's safe deposit box held all the money and jewels, and they were not present in the house during the night of the murders. I don't want to get too lost in Law and Order land with you guys on this case. We're just gonna speed this up, and I'll tell you that Ronald was mentally evaluated. He was deemed insane, and on December 5th of 1975, the jury deemed him guilty of 6 counts of murder in the second degree, giving him 6 life sentences, which is a total of 150 years. You know, I guess on the off chance that he was possessed and immortal, they really want to make sure they got his ass. DeFeo's statement was, "I'm going to appeal the sentence and conviction. I'll bet I'll be back here in 1 year." So later that same month is December 23rd, 1975. The Lutzes moved into 112 Ocean Avenue, the Amityville Horror House. And by January 13 of 1976, they fled the home in terror. Immediately after, the Lutzes flee their home with zero intention of ever going back. They call every paranormal investigator willing to listen to their story, but they don't ever plan to go back to the house, so don't know why that's so important. Their motives for this can only be speculated, but one of the many paranormal investigators they reach out to is a man named Stephen Kaplan, who actually ended up writing the book Amityville Horror Conspiracy. The credibility of Stephen Kaplan is questionable, considering he is a self-proclaimed professional vampirologist and the founder of the Vampire Research Center, as well as the Parapsychology Institute of America. Stephen Kaplan, professional vampire hunter, lives in New York. Thanks to What We Do in the Shadows, envisioning vampires in New York is hilarious to me.
So sorry. Sir, you can't be throwing ancient coins at me.
I think the main purpose for the Baron's visit is to find out whether we as vampires have populated America. But as you can see, the place is fucking massive.
By now, you should rule this, what is this place again?
Staten Island.
Anyway, so that February, Kaplan says George Lutz called him wanting to investigate his house. He gets ready for the investigation until February 19th. George calls to tell him to forget about the whole thing. He says he and his family have been through enough and that they don't want any more publicity. So imagine Stephen Kaplan's surprise when 5 days later, on February 24th, he turns on the 10 o'clock Channel 5 evening news that shows Ed and Lorraine Warren doing a seance in the Amityville Horror House. We just don't want any more publicity. What?
So that was a fucking lie.
It was in that moment Stephen decided the whole thing was a hoax, and he dedicated himself to proving that it was a hoax. He called the Long Island Press, and they ran an article headlined, "Ghost Hunter Smells a Hoax." This caused a big war between the Warren and the Lutzes with Stephen Kaplan. Later, the Lutzes disclosed that the reason why they canceled on Kaplan was because he claims to be a vampirologist. They just didn't think that someone who claims to believe in vampires is credible. Regardless, it's now the media pounces on the Lutz's story, and the house itself becomes a topic of conversation and not the Ronald DeFeo murders. The Amityville Horror Conspiracy begins. The rumor mill runs rampant. Inconsistencies in the Lutz's story are everywhere. No 2 articles about the haunting are the same. The Lutzes had a number of mediums enter their home, but most famously, Ed and Lorraine Warren were among them. Ed claims he was physically pushed to the ground, and Lorraine felt a deep sense of something demonic and was overcome with visions of the DeFeo's dead bodies. And they famously captured this photo in the house. First, the Lutzes had their story published in Good Housekeeping magazine, Life in a Haunted House. But then, George and Kathy Lutz decided that they wanted to publish their story into a novel. They approached a publisher who got in contact with Jay Anson, who you can see is credited with writing the book and not the Lutzes. Now, this wasn't just a coincidence. Jay Anson wasn't just a random person that the publishers approached. Jay Anson was a writer for a company that makes documentary shorts covering behind-the-scene looks at theatrical features. And he had worked on a short documentary about the 1973's The Exorcist. Prentice Hall, the publishing company, approached by the Lutzes, had already been approached by Jay Anson and Father John Nicola, who was the Exorcist film's technical consultant. The two wanting to write a book together called Psychology of the Devil. Well, that book never happened. They got offered to write the Amityville Horror instead. Nicola wrote the foreword, and Jay Anson wrote the rest of the novel. Later, Nicola would publish a book called Diabolical Possession and Exorcism. Jay Anson would never publicly state whether or not he believes the Amityville story or not. Ah, shucks. He would simply say that the book is based on 35 hours, Jesus Christ, 35 hours of audio recordings given to him by George Lutz. I have no idea whether the book is true or not, but I'm sure that the Lutzes believe what they told me to be true. And Jay Anson died in 1980, so we'll never get a straight answer out of him. The book being published in 1977 was a smash hit. It's no surprise there was a movie that was released in 1979. Investigators became even more dedicated to proving that the whole thing was a hoax because of how much money they were making off of the story. In the book, George claims that the Amityville Historical Society told him that the house was on land that the Shinnecock tribe used as an enclosure for the sick, mad, and dying, but that the tribe hadn't buried anyone there because they believed the land was infested with demons. However, the Shinnecock tribe was not known to have lived in Amityville area at all. And the Amityville Historical Society says that all of this is false, and they did not say that. And to top this whole thing off, the hard copy print of the book and the paperback copy of the book are different. They changed at least 25 passages between the two versions. Some just minor changes, but some major changes. So even the books aren't consistent with each other. My copy of the book wasn't even consistent from page 2 to page 5. I read the paperback version because I couldn't find a copy of the hardback version. I noticed on page 2 it says they moved in December 23rd. And then on page 5 it says they moved in on December 18th. Like, which was it? I actually don't have a confirmed date for when they moved in. Every time I look it up, it changes between the 18th and 23rd. My gut tells me they moved in the 23rd, and they just claimed the 18th to make it seem like they were there longer. But that's just my conspiracy theory. So Jay Anson split the book proceeds down the middle with the Lutzes, and the film rights were sold shortly after for $200,000, which is pretty poetic because that's the same price as the insurance claim that Ronald DeFeo was after for killing his family. After taxes, George and Kathy Lutz made out of the whole ordeal with about like $300,000. Ronald DeFeo's lawyer, William Weber, was furious over the whole ordeal. In 1978, Weber told the Associated Press that he had met the Lutzes after they left the home, but before they went public with the story. And he claims that they had created this horror story over many bottles of wine that George was drinking. We were creating something the public wanted to hear about.
We had a nice evening conversation. So this story evolved over dinner with the Lutzes and a bottle of wine. I think it was about 3 bottles of wine. Yeah.
The Lutzes attempted to sue Weber for this for $1 million, but the judge threw out the case. It appears to me that to a large extent, the book is a work of fiction. William Weber countersued the Lutzes and Jay Anson for fraud and breach of contract, which is fancy schmancy talk for "you stole my idea." Weber claimed that the Lutzes agreed to write a book with him called Devil on My Back, and the court made them pay Weber $17,500. While that is nothing to scoff at, it's nowhere close to the $300,000 that the Lutzes made off of the first book in the movie. After all of this insanity, over the years, Ronald DeFeo's story kept changing. Everything from his sister Dawn did it and he only killed her in self-defense, to the mob did it and he was framed, to he was actually in the house high on pot in the basement when it happened and just doesn't know anything, to confessing that the voices told him to do it. There was no insanity, only people talking to Weber about the books, movies, about me being possessed. Another time, he is quoted saying, "There was no demon. You know who the demon is. I Am the Demon. Ronald DeFeo died in prison in 2021, and the cause of death has not been released to the public, which is so interesting to me. I wonder if it ever will be, because it's, you know, been a few years. I wonder why it hasn't been released to the public. It's such a high-profile case. Little did anyone know that the 79's The Amityville Horror movie would turn into one of the weirdest horror franchises of all time. According to Wikipedia, there are 46 Amityville movies. My favorite titles being Amityville in Space, Amityville Karen, and Amityville Death Toilet, which, like, I guess there were spooky toilets in the first book, and so maybe it's related. I haven't seen any of these, I just enjoy their titles. I definitely plan on having a marathon soon because they sound delightful. 4 families have lived in the Lutz's home since they left, and none of them report having any paranormal activity happen.
This is the Red Room. Nothing more than a storage area where Allison and her brothers and I used to keep toys. Just red, you know?
But the Warrens do claim they cleansed the house, so who's to say?
That home has been exorcised. That is the only way anybody could live in peace in that home.
The current owners refuse to speak to us.
So, do you think the Amityville Horror is based on a true story? Before you answer that, I'm gonna leave you with one last bit of trivia. In the book, the Lutzes claim that they found hoof prints in the snow on New Year's Day leading to their destroyed garage. But weather reports do show that there was no snow on New Year's Day in Amityville in 1976. Maybe the vampire hunter was onto something.
Good evening. Go back to your own country. What the fuck?
Okay, I am positive there are facts I have left out. If you would love to leave your own comments talking about what you've learned about the Amityville Horror. And as always, please feel free to recommend movies to me to cover. Don't forget to keep it creepy. And I hope you have a wonderful Halloween season. Happy Halloween. Happy Halloween. Happy Halloween. Exhausting. I'm exhausted. God, I hope I was in focus. If I wasn't, I'm gonna scratch.